I'm Tommy Salmons. You know, it's one of those things that you look into that you can't help but see reoccurring in the pattern of government are the lies, the the way that they come at you, and they purely lie to you. I would guess, excuse me, I would guess that those lies are perpetrated by pretty much the same people, at least the same roles, and these specific roles have boundaries around them in which they can operate within these boundaries. But within those boundaries, it allows them to tell you things that you never are supposed to question. Friday was the 26th anniversary of Waco being set on fire, the Branch Davidian on Mount Carmel being set on fire. One of the things that struck me was talking with my mom about this, and how she never thought it was necessary to question the narrative that was put out there for the public to consume. And it seems like all too often that's the default point we all turn to. Over the past week, a few news stories have broke. I'm not going to get into Julian Assange at the moment, but we will talk about Assange again in the upcoming weeks, because I think there's a lot that needs to be said about who Julian Assange is and what he did. But we found out this past week the Mueller report was released on Thursday. Now, I'm not going to act like I sat here and I read the entire report. I didn't. I don't have time for that shit. The official narratives, in my opinion, are released to be official narratives. They are released in order to force one side or the other to acknowledge and accept their authority. And it's all about the authority of the narrative, not the narrative itself. But within the narrative, we found out that the United States government did not find Donald Trump guilty of any sort of conspiracy with Russia in order to win the presidency. Yet it goes on to cover the obstruction claims, and during the coverage of the obstruction, it claims that it cannot specifically define whether or not he did or did not attempt to obstruct justice. There's a quote that's going around in which Trump says, "I'm fucked," yada, yada, yada. I don't know every word of the quote, but I know he says, "I'm fucked." And if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not looking at this wrong, it's quite possible that Donald Trump knew what a special prosecutor meant to his presidency. It's actually quite possible that he felt like the assignment of a special prosecutor to investigate him, not a crime, but him during his presidency, was a sure sign of things to come. And so I can't help but think that possibly Donald Trump saw the special prosecutor as someone put in place to overthrow his election and his presidency as the president of the United States. I can't help but think that Donald Trump looked at all the potential moves on the proverbial chessboard and he thought, fuck, these dudes are going to do everything within their power to fuck me. I'm not going to be able to govern. I'm not going to be able to be the president. I'm not going to be able to do anything without the oversight. Think what you may of Donald Trump. I don't specifically like him. I have particular reasons behind that, namely the war in Yemen, which we will get to here in a minute. But the fact of the matter is that the Russiagate scandal was no more than the weapons of mass destruction scandal in Iraq. It was a distraction. It was a lie from the beginning. I heard a tape, and this is a tape that's available on YouTube. I will put it in the show notes. If you interpret it different than me, let me know that you interpret it different. I would be quite interested into hearing any kind of different interpretation of what is being said in this tape. But I was in a conversation with Will Porter, who's a journalist. He's written a lot of stories. He's been on the right side of this Russiagate story since day one. And there's a little shout out to you, Will. I know we're going to find some time to get together here in the future, and we're going to get ourselves an episode together and all that. But I'd like to give you a little shout out because we were discussing this the other day, and I think it's important. He pointed out the fact that there was a tape of Seymour Hersh discussing Seth Rich, in which Seymour Hersh acknowledges that he believes and he has information that leads him to believe that Seth Rich was, in fact, the leaker to WikiLeaks. Not the Russian government, not some Trump stooge, Seth Rich, who was a DNC staffer, worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I believe he worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign for a while too. Didn't like what he was saying, so he revealed the information. He was later shot in the back twice, and the evidence shows that he was being mugged. He was fighting a mugger off and trying to get away and was shot in the back twice. There's a lot of speculation that possibly the Clintons had him killed. I'm not going to get into that. It's not my speculation of that nature is not my forte. I find it interesting, but at the same time, I would rather not say something of that nature were true when I have no firsthand knowledge that it were true. So I kind of steer away from those things, and I hope all of you understand that I don't want to get involved in that conversation because there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Hillary Clinton had Seth Rich killed. The fact of the matter is that Seth Rich was killed, and there is good evidence that he was the person leaking emails to WikiLeaks. Okay? So, neither is there, and just a little fill-in here, neither is there information that Seth Rich had ever worked in congruence knowingly with Russians. All right, so that I feel like is covered. I feel like I've covered my ass there. The fact of the matter is since the beginning of the Cold War, probably before the beginning of the Cold War, the United States and Russia have been going at it as far as covert operations, attempting to influence each other's elections. Unfortunately, in this tape of Seymour Hersh, he makes quite a declaration that I would just not expect to hear from a journalist like Seymour unless he was 100% positive that it was true. And Seymour Hersh goes on to explain later in the tape that, and full transparency, the recording I've heard has been edited. I don't know to what extent. I don't know what whose voice is being hidden or this, that, and the other. But there's obviously at least one side of the conversation that has been completely edited out of the conversation. So full disclosure there, that I'm not certain exactly to the extent in which the editing has taken place, but I feel like this is an important point because it's something that I've been watching. And Seymour Hersh points out that the entire Russia hacking operation is simply a Brennan operation of disinformation. A lot of people are familiar with I think it was the head of the CIA under Reagan. I can't remember the name. I'm sorry, forgive me. Had said that the disinformation campaign would be complete when everything that Americans believed was false. So we know that in the past there has been disinformation campaigns in which we are supposed to fall into these traps of falsities and believing these falsities. We also know that Seymour Hersh has been on the right side of most journalism throughout his life, since the Pentagon Papers probably would be an accurate time frame from which Seymour Hersh has been on top of the politics of the day and not handing out false information. We can also say with some amount of certainty that the Mueller report has been known to be false, or has been known to show Trump as innocent for quite some time. And just how much time, I doubt we can know, but I don't believe in any alternate universe that it would take 22 months for a professional prosecutor to prove the guilt of an amateur politician. So, how long has he been sure that Trump was not guilty of the conspiracy that he was accused of? And why was he carrying it on? Also, why was Brennan given a job at MSNBC? There's an old saying, I've heard it quite a few times, but there's an old saying that once an agent, always an agent. Is Brennan at MSNBC, I'm sorry, is Brennan filling a position at MSNBC just another part of Operation Mockingbird? Are we just supposed to believe that Operation Mockingbird no longer exists? Are we just supposed to believe that the United States government one day finally decided, oh, you know what? We don't need to run operations against our own people because, they believe we're telling the truth. So, they're smart enough to figure that out. Is that what we're supposed to believe? I would argue that that's not the case, and I would argue that Brennan is in fact an agent in place at MSNBC in order to spread disinformation. There are plenty of others that I would think are doing the same thing. Adam Schiff, I would think, would be one of them. There's quite a few, and I could point them out as they spoke. I can't think of all the names off the top of my head right now. I would advise that you're careful as to what you listen to, and I would advise that Trump saying, I'm fucked, my presidency is over, is more in reference to the fact that the potential of overcoming a special prosecutor is slim to none. And given that there were so many enemies against him in the beginning, I would imagine he's looking at it saying, you know what, this is going to turn a lot of people against me that are already for me, and this is going to be fucked up for my entire presidency. I'm never going to get anything fucking done. Nobody's ever going to be able to get anything done, and it's pretty fucked up. And I that's the way I take it. Now, I could be wrong. I'm completely trying to interpret some another person's fucking intent, another person's view of the world, and I could have that completely wrong. But again, there are a couple of things to watch out for. There's this Barr spying investigation on the FISA warrants, and there was absolutely no question about it, something funny about that. Whether or not our government is operating in this manner all the time, and it just seems funny to a free individual, and it's not funny to a state, that does this regularly. Maybe that's the way they do it. But there was definitely, in my opinion, something funny about that portion of the FISA warrants. Papadopoulos being investigated for being an Israeli agent. I find that kind of funny because everybody within the United States government is an Israeli agent, except for Ilhan Omar. But every other person within the U.S. government is an Israeli agent. Give me a break. What pinky? Sorry, my dog's talking to me. So there are a couple of things I think that are worth keeping an eye on. This story, Will Porter and I, when we were talking the other day, we both agreed that this story is far from over. There's going to be more information. It's probably going to be coming out for a long time, and it's probably going to be coming out in waves. There's going to be, still to this day, even after the report, you still hear calls for impeachment. I find that ridiculous. I find it ridiculous in the defense of the Democrats, not in the defense of the Republicans. I actually think it is a bad move for Democrats to do that. If you look at the approval rating of Republicans after the impeachment of Clinton, the approval rating of Clinton went through the roof, and the approval rating of the Republicans that held the impeachment went through the floor. I don't think that going through impeachment hearings is going to help the Democrats. Not that I am favorable to Democrats in general. It's just that I think that what Trump has been doing in the Middle East is insufferable and unforgivable. I truly do, and we'll get into that. Let's move on to that subject. Let's. The other day there was a vote on the floor, in which the Congress had claimed the war powers over the President of the United States. It made it through the Congress, it made it through the Senate, and Trump got it, and he vetoed the bill. And ultimately what this bill was going to do was going to give Congress the power to vote on whether or not the United States belonged in Yemen. And if you're not aware, there's this catastrophe going on in Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of Yemenis have been killed. You've got tens of thousands of children dying of cholera, a disease that can be cured with some Gatorade. And the United States military is participating in and funding and arming the Saudis while they perpetrate this war in Yemen. It's a complete disgrace. The Yemeni people have no power to do anything to the United States government. They have zero power whatsoever. Our freedom is not being protected by Yemenis being murdered by the thousands. Not one iota. And for Trump to say that Congress declaring that they recognize in the Constitution that their power is to declare or end wars, and to Trump to say that that is a threat to his constitutional powers, shows the complete oblivious nature in which Trump operates. We hear hyperbole day in and day out. Trump is Hitler. He's a dictator. He's a tyrant. He's a fascist. Yada, 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 yada. Okay? Trump is not Mussolini. He's certainly not Hitler. But what Trump is a businessman. And when you do business, when you're a businessman, you're the top of the food chain. You don't ask permission. You tell people. And so what we're witnessing is a type of tyranny or a type of dictatorship, I guess, as far as mentality goes. Not necessarily as far as action goes, but at least in the mentality of the way that Trump approaches government. In the Constitution, if one were to care, it does state that Congress has the power to declare war. So when Trump says that the bill they were looking to pass the other day about war powers is actually a threat to his constitutional power as president, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He thinks as president, he should be the sole proprietor of the voice to declare war. And I understand that. He's a CEO and he thinks it's up to him. But that's not the way it's written out. It's written out for checks and balances purposes. He shouldn't even have the power to veto it. If you really want to know the truth, I find that to be a major flaw in the Constitution and the voting on this bill. But that's another story because there are plenty of flaws within the Constitution if you really want to dig into it. But this particular bill, what Trump is actually referring to, I think it was in 1973. I could be mistaken. Somebody could correct me. I'm pretty sure it was the War Powers Act of 1973 that kind of began, at least on a pretty regular basis, to shift the idea of starting war. And they began to shift that idea from Congress to the presidency. And then in 2001, with the AUMF, I could have that wrong, man. I'm not always the best on these things. I do my best to remember, but some of these names kind of escape me at times. I believe it's the AUMF of 2001, and what it basically said was that, all in all, what it said was that if terrorism were to be suspected in a general area, that was to take the war powers away from the Congress and put the war powers into the president's hands. So what Congress was doing with wanting to at least have a vote on the floor about the war in Yemen, they weren't even voting to stop the war in Yemen, which needs to be completely halted at the moment. Immediately needs to be stopped. But what they were doing is they were voting on whether or not they could have a vote on the war in Yemen. And Trump vetoed that. After they passed it, Trump vetoed it, saying, no, you think you can have a vote, but no, I don't believe you can have a vote. And since I have veto power, I'm vetoing this, and that's that. If they had half the balls they try to act like they have, they would have pushed further and given Trump a lesson in the Constitution, in his constitutional powers. Unfortunately, Congress is made up of a bunch of pussies. So what ended up happening was Trump said, no, I'm not willing to adhere to your vote. Therefore, I don't even want to hear your vote because we are going to continue to assist Saudi Arabia in committing genocide in Yemen. Needless to say, if you really want a lot of information about what's going on in Yemen, Scott Horton's your man. Go check out the Scott Horton Show. He's covered Yemen. He's discussed Yemen. He's, without a doubt, probably one of the number one voices for peace. If you don't want to go check out the Scott Horton Show, just go back a few episodes. I talked to Scott Horton about all foreign policy, including Yemen, and he's more than happy to discuss all these things. So those are the two major stories that I wanted to cover for the week. I don't really have a whole lot more to say about those. I think I pretty much covered them in as much detail as I'm going to cover them in, unless new information emerges. But I'm no pundit, and I'm not a journalist. I'm just some dude talking into a microphone, and I figured out how to record it. One of the other things I wanted to bring up is I've hit a point with this podcast where I've kind of like got an idea where it was going. When I first started it, I just kind of was throwing shit at the wall, seeing what stuck. And I was splitting interests between entrepreneurship and politics. And I really didn't have a clue in what direction the podcast was going. So I picked kind of a generic name that I had named a short story I had written years ago. And I had stuck with that name as I was working out the kinks, trying to figure out in which direction the podcast was going. As things have moved on, I've kind of gotten a clearer view of what really matters to me and what I think that we should be talking about on the podcast. As that view has become clearer, the name has seemed more and more inappropriate. Stranger Encounters doesn't seem to fit the bill of what I am trying to accomplish. And so in the next few months, we are going to see a branding change on the podcast. I'm not going to change the content unless, of course, you people bitch, moan, and groan enough to let me know that I'm not doing a good job. Of course, if you tell me I'm not doing a good job, I am going to do better because that's what I'm tasked to do. And I will continue to move forward in that. But at the moment, the content is going to continue down the same road. I have some really exciting interviews coming up. We're looking at a couple of authors, CIA whistleblower, a lot of different things coming up. But I'm going to be focusing the podcast more on the intelligence agencies, the permanent government, as I like to call them, and how we can fight back against these people what battles we can take on. We'll be discussing some law. We'll be discussing some philosophy, maybe some Rothbardianism. You can't get enough Rothbardianism. It's gotten most of us to where we're at today, so it's always good to discuss that. I am lucky enough to have a contact who's a former student of Rothbard, as you well know. So he'll be back on the show. Obviously, Scott Horton's coming back on the show. If I can con Pete Raymond into coming back on the show, which that's a big joke. I don't have to con him. I just have to give him a decent topic. I promise. I'll have him back on this show, and there's going to be a lot of other people back on the show. So we're going to have some really good times. I got a better idea of where I'm going with this project, what we're looking to accomplish, how we're going to get there, how we're going to work together. And I'm excited about the rest of this year and what we're doing. I know this episode's shorter than normal. We're at 36 minutes and 30 seconds right now. And I'm so happy that all of y'all decided to join me. And I can't wait till next week because we're going to have a great guest. So in a couple of weeks, we'll get back onto the progressive era. I promise. It just didn't feel like it was the right day for that today. I thought about it, but it didn't feel right today. I thought the current events, things going on in the news, I thought, hey, let's talk about this stuff for a minute. So really, really appreciate all of you tuning in. I know if you're listening to me that you like me because most people aren't listening to me. Just kidding. I really appreciate it. I've seen the numbers being growing here recently. It's really exciting. I'm excited about going forward. I'm excited about where we're going and what we're doing. And I'm excited about all of you. Do not be afraid to reach out to me. TommySalmons@gmail.com. And if you don't know how to spell Salmons, it's SALMONS. That's Tommy, SALMONS @gmail.com. Feel free to reach out to me. Find me on Twitter @TD Hit me up on Facebook, Tommy D Salmons /burger. Like, I'm accessible. You can find me. Everything's straight. If you message me on YouTube, I may not see it for a while, but I will respond as soon as I do see it. And if I do not respond immediately, it is no slight to you. It is just the simple fact I do not check YouTube very often. But thank you all very much. That was Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.